just come up to Easter weekend, and I'm really hoping I can do the first firing of the engine this weekend. We are going away for a couple of days though, so it'll have to wait till the end of the weekend, but I've been trying to do everything I can, coming out each evening, just doing a little bit, just getting it ready for that first start, making sure everything's ready. So the first thing I needed to do was actually bolt the carburetors on properly with all their gaskets and the manifold in place. This turned out to be harder than I expected because of the curse of the Brooklands with its limited access to everything again. So the first problem is you can't bolt the manifold to the engine with the carbs in place because the bolts that hold them go through the middle off the throats down there. So you have to have the carburetors off to get to those bolts. That wasn't too bad. I managed to get all that in place. There's a gasket in there with some Hylamar on it. The next problem is you then have to bolt the carburetors on, keeping them all in line so that the linkages still work correctly. To do that, I loosened it off a bit, which is why one of these is still a bit loose. I need to retighten there's a little joiner down in there. Again, there's only just room for that, but that's what links the two throttle shafts together. And I found I was able to get the top bolts through to hold the carbs in place, but trying to get the bottom ones was very, very difficult. So you can sort of see you have to get up inside here. One, it's difficult to get access, and two, it's hard to get enough light in there to see what you were doing. And what I actually discovered was I wasn't able to get the bolts through and get the nuts and the washers and things done up on the other side of this little angle bar I put in place to give me somewhere to attach the throttle return springs. So it proved impossible. What I ended up doing was taking this crossbar off and brazing nuts to it so that they're effectively captive. And then I was finally able to get the bolts through from the back into those captive nuts and do everything up tight. I really wish there were ratcheting Whitworth spanners. I've never seen any. I have got a set of AF Imperial ones, which are very handy, but Whitworth ones would be great because to do up these bottom bolts, you have to get a spanner up inside here. There's limited access, and you can only really turn it a sixth of a turn each time. So it took quite a while to get all of this tight and done up, but that's all in place now. I also finished up the ignition wiring, which you can see here. I have put in the spark plugs, and I had to do those up fairly tightly to get them to seal nicely. They're all brand new, of course. And you can see now how this tube keeps the ignition wires nicely out of the way. I do have the plug wires in the correct order, and I have the magneto in a position where I know in the fully retarded position, which is this lever all the way forwards, I've removed the actual sort of ball end on there. I've got that in the nickel plating bath at the moment. But I do know that, oh, my gimbal's getting a bit strange. I do know that that is the fully retarded position, and coming back is fully advanced, which makes sense with how this has been sort of butchered, where they've open the slot up in this so that you can get more advance out of it. I don't have timing lights on this engine. I think timing marks. I think I mentioned that before, but I did put a mark on the flywheel for top dead center, and I am able to use a timing light to, I am able to use a timing light in order to see when it is actually firing in relation to top dead center. So I know that top dead center on number one cylinder, that timing mark is vertical. It's here. And I was able to set it up so that I can see when it's either advanced or retarded. So if the mark moves this direction, so anti-clockwise, you're retarding it, because top dead center's here, the flywheel goes around that way. If the spark's happening here, it's after top dead center. So even though there aren't any marks to set it to, I was able to set it up so I can see that adjusting the body of the magneto or adjusting the lever is moving that mark from here over to here. So I know when that's fully retarded, I'm well in the safe position for trying to start this, and I've got enough adjustment there to hopefully get it to fire. And then the final adjustment will come once the car's actually drivable. I just have jumper lead set up now to my battery to be able to turn it over. And it turns over pretty slowly on the starter. I don't want to do it too much with the plugs in there, but we should be able to see. I also set up a little protocol for myself to make sure that the starter handle is always down here next to me before I try firing this engine, so I don't end up killing myself by having that whipping around. So I think maybe if I hook this up to the battery, it does turn over. Might have been hard to see, but you can see the carb slides going up and down. So I'm pretty sure everything's set up ready for this to run. I do still need to put oil in it. At the moment, there's just the oil that I squirted a bit down the bores, and I've oiled all the top end with an oil can just to see that it would turn over. That's why I don't want to do that too much, because I don't have the full oil system hooked up. But I will fill it up with oil once I remember exactly how much needs to go in there. And the other thing I may do is, obviously I don't have a cooling system, but what I may be able to do is attach the pipes where they need to go. So these are the pipes. Obviously one sits on top there and one sits on the side like that. I may put these in place just so I can actually fill the block with water, just for that first run, just to give me a little bit extra protection about overheating it. So I think that's the plan. Like I say, I'm a few days away from that, but it looks like everything is good and ready. Obviously there's no exhaust, I've just got that temporary manifold on there. I may set up a board or something underneath that, because I imagine it might be a bit smoky or a bit black that first startup, especially because I've got a little bit of oil down inside the cylinders. Been away over the weekend, but we actually went a day early. I took a day off work, went up a day early, see my family, and then came back a day early. So it's Easter Monday today. So I was hoping today would be the day that I did the first run of the engine, just to see that it would work. So I checked the gearbox was all full of oil. I was, or rather checked the engine was full of oil, and I was going to put oil in the gearbox and the differential as well. And I have got the correct oil, I just don't have enough of it. Turns out the containers I have are only 1 litre, and I need about 3 pints in each, which is about 1.8 litres. So I'll have to get more oil. And I had another go at making sure the timing was correct. So I now have it set just after top dead center when fully retarded. The book says it needs to be at top dead center when fully retarded, but for the first start I just wanted to make it fairly gentle. So you can see that the magneto isn't sitting square on the body because you can adjust it. So there is a little bit more adjustment there. It's actually adjusted all the way advanced at the moment, so I may want to tweak it a little bit further, but it's better at being twisted away from the engine. I checked again with my timing light just to make sure it was exactly where I thought it was. I actually bought a new timing light because that old one was starting to get a bit flaky. And then it turns out the new one isn't working very well on this engine, and then the old one started working well again. So that's what I was using. what else did I do? I checked the fuel levels as well in the carb bowl. What I did is hooked up a piece of tube to the inlet and using a little squeezy bottle full of petrol, just filled it up the carbs, and that's when things started to go wrong. So it turns out I had a few leaks. The main reason for that was my pipes that take the fuel up to the float bowls. You can see these banjos, they have kind of one dished side and one flat side, and I had one of those wrong. So I had to redo that, and it looks like I hadn't actually set the fuel float levels either, so I've done that now. And to do all of that, I kind of had to take the carbs off again, and it's just such a pain in the neck. I did manage to get them off, and I decided, well, this manifold that's on here, obviously somebody's made this. It's all been welded up, and they've added these plates so that the carbs can bolt on. The only problem is these aren't flat, so this isn't square, which means it's really hard to get a bolt through there and get it to sit flat, because it won't. So I figured, well, if somebody made that one, I had a couple of old manifolds around. These were the manifolds with the big hotspot pipe that came off the end, so I have chopped all of that off. It's basically this stuff that all kind of went on the end there. I've chopped that off, I've milled all the edges flat, and I made these two blocks that will fit the carburetors. I made the two together, that's why there's little brass pins there. The brass pins just help me hold them together with a bolt through the middle while I machine them. And what I'm going to do is I'll bolt this through. I'll have to drill out this hole to the same size as this, which is 5/16, I think. And then I can bolt that through, so I can bolt that in place and I can TIG weld that on. And then after it's welded on, I will bore out the hole in the middle to match the carburetor. As I machine this, I actually realized it's been cracked. So you can just see maybe, it's a bit hard. Possibly you can see the cracks that are in there. So what I'll have to do is I'll machine a little V in there just with a tungsten burr. I'll just cut them down a little bit and weld those up when I weld everything else. I haven't actually tried welding this or this aluminium. This was just some scrap from back in the days when I was working at Weta. I pulled it out of the scrap bin. This is some sort of aircraft grade aluminium. I think it's what we made the zoetrope we did once from. It machines really well, so hopefully it'll be easy to weld. I'm not very good at TIG welding aluminium. And I will use some 3mm aluminium plate to close off the end here. These little end pieces are important, I believe, and it's to do with the pulses from the carburetors and how the mixture goes into the ports and things. So I know they're definitely important when you've got a single carb sitting up here. So I'm assuming that if you've got two carbs in the middle, having them on the ends isn't going to hurt. So that's something to do. Since the carbs were off and apart, I did cross drill them so I can pin them. Somebody sent me a suggestion, which was instead of using the SU taper pin, which you have to kind of hammer into place, you can use a roll pin. So I've drilled those for 1/16 roll pins, which are the smallest I could find. I don't have any, so I've had to order those, so it means I'm waiting for parts again. But I did manage to drill them. Turns out my 1/16 drill bits were all blunt. I only had a couple of them. I did have some brand new 1mm, so I drilled through with that first and then opened the hole up to 1/16. And at the moment there's just little split pins there just to keep everything aligned on the shafts. So once those pins arrive, I'll be able to push those in and lock those onto the shaft. I'm wondering if I should make one of these a stud and the other one just a through hole. So this is my little bracket that the throttle return springs fit to. You can see it down here. So because it's so hard to get into here, I had brazed those nuts on there so you can get a bolt through from behind. I think I might leave it like that. I'll probably just cross drill these and use nuts and bolts rather than studs. There is access there. It's a bit fiddly, but it's not too bad. The top ones are easy enough to get to. So the only other thing I noticed was my when I was trying to tighten up the banjos to stop the leak, one of these moved. So what I'm going to do is fully assemble the carbs, get everything nice, actually test them out with my little fuel pump and make sure there are no leaks before I put them on the car. I think that'll be much easier. And other than that, like I say, I have to wait for those parts. I do have TIG gas, so I should be able to TIG weld this up during the week. I will need to cut new gaskets, so I'm going to just laser cut some gaskets for there, and close up that end with some 3mm aluminium scrap that I have. But the only other problem I've noticed is I'm not quite sure that the output terminal is matching up to the rotor on the magneto when it's sparking. It seems a little bit off, so the spark seems to have further to jump. Apparently there's all sorts of different marks and things inside the magneto. It's obviously been hacked around before, so those marks may not have been correct. What I have found is when the plugs are in, I'm not seeing a spark. So at least I'm not picking it up with my timing light. So I think it's got trouble when it's actually under compression. So there's something not quite right there. The other thing you have to be careful of is with these old-fashioned vintage terminals, you have to unscrew these terminals to get the wires off. And you have to be very careful. When I do it, I take all the terminals off before I take any of the spark plugs out, just to avoid dropping the things down into the cylinders. That is one disadvantage of these vintage engines as compared to a modern engine with the clip-on leads. And you could use clip-on leads on this, of course, but it's a vintage car, so I'm going to do it the vintage way. So I'm going to talk to Paul, who rebuilt my magneto for me. He's been really helpful, so I'm sure he'll know what to do. And the cardboard is underneath there, so I can check for oil leaks. I do have one down there somewhere. I'm not sure exactly where from. When I filled up the engine with oil, you have to do it from the top, of course, and I managed to spill some of it, so it was dripping down. As I cleaned it up, it took some of the paint off there. But there was also quite a big leak, and it turns out to be this middle stud hole. I hadn't actually put that middle stud in place, and it doesn't go through into the pressurized oil places because that's all done externally with the pipes. But it is in line with the oil return underneath the head. So we're actually inside the head. So oil was dripping out of there, which did make a bit of a mess. So this exhaust, this is just a piece of my flex pipe stuff I used on my Austin 7. It just happens to be a nice sliding fit up inside there. So that's what I've rammed up inside there to be an exhaust for the moment. And the only other thing is I went through and checked all the valve clearances again, and the spark plug gaps and the magneto points gap and all of those kind of things before I ran it or tried running it. I did try once. I wasn't too happy with it, with all the fuel leaks and things. I did just try it just to see what would happen. The other thing I had done is, this is my magneto kill switch. So this is a nice high quality switch. I find to get really decent switches, you have to go to a proper electronics supplier. Places like Repco and Supercheap and all those kind of things, they're just not great quality. This one is all brass, normally open and normally closed contacts. The knob unscrews, so I can change that if I want to. Made in the States, I think. They're not cheap, but they're as reasonably priced as the sort of Nava brand ones or things like that you buy from Repco or Super Cheap. So I find it's worth getting those. I think that came from DigiKey, made by a company called Little Fuse. So that's kind of where I'm at. So once again, I'm waiting for parts. I'm waiting for the roll pin. As I say, I did have a quick go seeing if it would fire, and there was absolutely nothing. So that's why I think the spark's just not there at the moment. So like I say, I'll find out about that, get that set up right, and once the carbs are rebuilt and this new manifold is done, I'll give it another go.